everyone. This is Sofia Smallstorm. I'm here today with a new podcast. It's the merry month of March. My guest today is someone that I actually have personally met. I have very high regard for. Her name is Melody Kramer. She's a lawyer. She's based in San Diego. The reason I'm interviewing her today is she has written an really amazing book. It is a very fulfilling read. I was thrilled reading it. I took chapter by chapter, trying to save it so it would last. But I also had to get through it because I had to interview her soon. And the title of the book is going to surprise you. It's called Why Lawyers Suck: Hacking the Legal System Part 1. And I was a little taken aback at the, bluntness of the title. So let's welcome Melody and have her explain why she chose such a title and has written such a book.
Good morning, Sophia. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And yes, I'd be happy to tell you about the book. And the reason for the cover and the title, Why Lawyers Suck. I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, and especially within the last 5 or 6 years, really had sort of an epiphany in terms of the fact that lawyers were just really miserable people to deal with, including me. And I really wanted to write a book about the reasons for that, because I felt like I was a reasonably decent, ethical, nice person, and yet I found myself in situations where it did not show the better part of me, and I was dealing with attorneys that were just horrible to deal with. And I really wanted to delve into that and ask the question why, and answer that question for average people who deal with lawyers, either on a day-to-day basis or just in some legal issue that happened to come into their lives. I wanted to give them some insight and some answers.
So I guess I'll break my questions down into parts. I guess the first question I would have to ask is, you're obviously very bright, and you may not want to brag about how bright you are, but you are. I have to tell people, this is not just bright, but a brilliant person and a very decent human being. So the combination of those two seems to be rare in the profession. And you're suggesting that there's some mechanism in the training and then the practice of the profession, and that the way that lawyers duel with one another, DUEL, that makes them, into very difficult personalities, not just professionally, but then also personally in their personal lives, right?
Yes, that's true. And it is not a factor of intellect. I mean, you have to have a decent intellect in order to get into law school and to survive law school. But really, there's a lot more at play, because there are plenty of smart people that don't become lawyers also. So, what is the unique characteristics that get you into law school and then keep you through the grueling course of law school? And then what happens to you after you get out of practice and out and practicing as a lawyer? And I found that those things are not designed to either find, retain, or promote people that are nice and pleasant in life at all.
Well, okay, Melody. So you started out, I'm assuming, as a nice, pleasant person, and you grew up in Nebraska. Was that right?
Actually, I grew up in a couple different places. But I went to college in Nebraska, and I went to law school in Nebraska. So, yeah, sort of nice Midwestern girl goes to law school sort of story, yeah. And I, look back at my childhood and everything, and my dad was a pastor, and we had a very nice family growing up, and I did not like controversy at all. But I was drawn to law school because I liked the intellectual exercise, and I also was a very competitive person, and it was a place to be competitive and show off my smarts, maybe. And people get really impressed when you say you're going to go to law school, and it's addictive. You want people to think that you're smart.
Well, okay. So in your early chapters, you explain about the law school phase and the training. And the impression I got from reading this beginning of the book was that lots of people want to go to law school. They're drawn to the idea of practicing law, becoming a lawyer, because they want to right wrongs and do good things in the world. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. I see that common thread all the time in people that want to be lawyers. Yeah.
So I'm assuming because your father was a pastor and you had this nice, possibly conservative Midwestern upbringing, that was also a factor in your decision to go to law school.
Uh, yeah, I think so. I certainly didn't view being a lawyer as being something that would make me rich or be able to drive a fancy car or anything like that. It was not that at all. Sort of my role models were more in terms of the founding fathers of our country. I particularly admired Jefferson. Um, and, when you look at the founding fathers and those of the Constitutional Convention that created an entirely new structure of government than what the world had seen before then, um, a lot of them were lawyers. And so I grew up with sort of that ideal of what being a lawyer was like. It was a respectable, honored profession that not everyone could do, but they really had an important role in the world. And that was sort of my view of the legal profession. And perhaps I think it was somewhat skewed by the fact that I didn't really know any lawyers. And so maybe that it allowed me to create this view of what I thought the legal profession should be, not realizing what it was really like.
Okay, Melody. Well, remember when we got together and you told me that story that had a profound effect on me about the exercise or assignment that they make you do in maybe the first year of law school that changes who you are in a very profound way? Do you remember which one that was?
Yes, I do. And what I found interesting about this is when I went to, I hope it's okay, I backtrack a little bit here. When I went to law school, I did not realize that the method of teaching law students, particularly in their first year of law school, is something that was created many years ago. I believe it was early in last century, and has been followed by all the law schools over the course of many, many, many years, probably close to a century at this point. Um, and I didn't realize the commonality of how the students were effectively sleep deprived, pitted against each other in classes, all this sort of stuff. I didn't see the commonality until I read Scott Turow's 1L book, where he talks about his first year of law school at Harvard Law and realizing that the experience in minute detail mirrored exactly what I went through in University of Nebraska 25 years later. And one of those aspects of the first year law experience was moot court. Moot court is something that's done near the end of your first year of law school. And it's where you have a sample appellate case to argue before mock judges, some of professors, but also they bring in attorneys and judges from the community to judge what you're doing. And they don't do cases that are simple or straightforward issues, no contract disputes, anything like that. They're very controversial, deeply emotional, and value-based cases. So in the case, my first year of law school, the moot court problem had to do, I believe, with defending a person who had been found with briefcase full of cocaine in his car trunk. And we had to discuss the issue of the propriety of the search, whether it was a good search or not, and therefore whether the case could proceed against this obvious drug dealer. In other years, they have things dealing with gay marriage, abortion rights, things that are very controversial in our society. Now, you get assigned a side to this case at random, but you have to be prepared to argue either side. And every year, in every law school class that I have talked to or I've seen reported about, written about, there is a small number of students who get this problem, see what they're being asked to argue, and whether they're pro or con, whatever it is, they go and tell the administration, we don't want to argue this. We are morally opposed. We can't possibly argue this. We think it's wrong. We want you to change the problem. And of course, the administration and the professors do not change the problem. It's been carefully designed and drafted and put together, and they're not going to do it. And you have the option of either doing it or quitting or failing out of law school. Those are your choices at that point in time. At that point in time, you have had probably the most grueling year of your life. You have been in these highly competitive classrooms where you can get called upon at a moment's notice and ask questions and made to look like an idiot. Happens to all of us. You've been sleep deprived from all the reading that you've done. You've been disconnected from your family and friends because you're spending all your time at the law library and reading your legal cases. You are exhausted. And you are asked to make this moral choice on whether you are going to be willing to argue something that you do not believe in when you are at this depleted state, sleep deprived, all of that. And I've got to tell you, almost 100% of law students will cave and they will do the problem. And they will stand up and they will vehemently argue something they do not believe in. And although I didn't see it at the time in the way I see it now, it seems like that is that first concrete step of disconnecting your values and your sense of right and wrong from the practice of law. And then, you're continually asked to do that over and over again, and it's hard to make the distinction. You have to disconnect who you are as a human being from who you are as a lawyer.
Well, it sounds like the very way that they teach you also unplugs you from the real world. I mean, you're overworking, you're overtired, you're not able to spend time with family or socialize with friends, and you're reading this stuff that has got to be like the driest stuff in the world, too.
Some of it's very dry, yes. Some is entertaining. But you're looking at it not in terms of getting to know and understand the people involved. It is more nitpicking the legal precedent that has been set. And it's really divorced from connection to humanity and reality.
And I think in your book, you also mentioned how law school teaches you how to think like a lawyer, but not how to be a lawyer. Was that it? Yes.
And with the exception of some clinical programs that I know in my experience, they were very limited slots to get into any of the practical programs that were available. And sometimes you can get a clerkship, but really the opportunities for really understanding the day-to-day obligations and responsibilities of being a lawyer is something that they assume you're going to be taught later at the law firm that hires you. And so I was fortunate enough in my third year of law school to get into criminal clinic, where we got to work on real cases at the local prosecutor's office. And it was a gift to be able to do that. There were only 10 people in our class of, I don't know what it was, like 130 or 40 at that time. Only 10 a semester could take that, and it was a lot of redrawing. But that was the only time in my career as a trial lawyer where I had an attorney right with me doing a jury trial with me. And we were fortunate enough to be able to do a jury trial. Some students don't get to do that. But, after that, I was on my own. And in fact, these days, as lawyers get out of law school, they are more and more on their own. What used to be a more traditional model was that lawyers would get out of law school and, they would clerk for a law firm during law school, do some part-time work, and then they would get an associate position with a law firm, and the law firm would train them in those day-to-day sort of things, be, the next level of their education. And now the way the job market is, a lot of lawyers don't get that. They get out of law school and they hang up a shingle because they need to make money and pay off their student loans, and they don't get that additional training at all.
Right, I can see that. So you appear to have had quite an array of legal experience. You've done criminal law. Tell us a little bit about all the different kinds of law you've practiced and why you've had such a range of specialties.
Right. Well, when I started out, I graduated from law school in 1993, and the job market was horrible. So we had, whereas the graduating year before us had like 90% of the students had jobs lined up at graduation, it was only like 38% the year that I graduated. So you kind of took whatever you could get. I had some experience in criminal law, and I was fascinated by criminal law. And when I got an opportunity to work as a public defender in a rural county near Lincoln, Nebraska, I snapped it up. I wanted trial experience. I wanted to be in a courtroom, and so I went with that. So I was a public defender for a while. I also got an opportunity to work as a part-time special prosecutor for crimes against children on the Omaha Indian Reservation there in Nebraska. And again, I wanted to get that criminal law experience, and that was a very interesting time that I spent there. It's almost like working in another country. And then I had started my own practice probably about 2 years after law school. And so I took whatever cases walked in my door, got referred to me by other attorneys, and they tended to be a lot of criminal cases because that's where I had the most experience, juvenile cases. And, courts would appoint me a lot of times when there was a conflict with the public defender's office because they saw me in court and saw that I had the skills and abilities. And so I did a lot of those and a little bit of civil cases, but I got burnt out after a few years just with the enormity of what you get exposed to when you're doing criminal defense. The subject matter is intense. I have seen the autopsy of a small child. I have seen photographs from gruesome murder scenes. I have, been at the penitentiary and the jail and, meeting with people. I've seen videotapes of rapes. You can't do that for too long without just getting burnt out. No one should see those things, but someone has to deal with them, and it's important for there to be attorneys who can stand alongside the accused and walk them through the process, whether they're guilty or not. That role is crucially important to keeping a vibrant constitution in our country. And so it's a very important role to play, but it is very exhausting, and you kind of need to turn to something else just for a break. And so then I moved out to California and I started doing more civil disputes, civil litigation, which ironically, when people are fighting over money, is almost nastier between the attorneys than it was in criminal cases. So that's kind of why I have such a varied experience. And also as a trial lawyer, every case is a learning experience. And so you get used to that of becoming an expert in some new area, and that helps that need for intellectual stimulation.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I have had some experience with lawyers in the sense that I used to work at many law firms in the past, and I've seen, a lot, but really in one or two kinds of law mainly. So you're unique in that regard. You seem to have really plumbed and traveled the breadth or a breadth of the profession. And you started something called Legal Greenhouse too, right? And you can tell us a little bit about that maybe, but I also want to stick with some of what you expose in this book. So.
Yes, Legal Greenhouse, I started as a new project to, how do I say this? It's sort of a think tank and a developer of innovative legal solutions. And so we have a series of projects that I'm working on, and the idea behind all of them is to improve the legal system in one way or another, going at it in different ways and different demographics. For example, this book, Why Lawyers Suck, the idea is to open dialogue, get the discussion going about the interaction between lawyers and their clients, because clients have a lot to say. I did market research on doing this, of what people really thought about lawyers, and it was very interesting and sometimes hard to hear the things that people said about lawyers, their perceptions that they had about lawyers. And a lot of them are absolutely fixable if lawyers are really interested in fixing their relationship with their clients, which they really should. And so I wanted to have that discussion. I'm also, and it's just in its infancy stage, but I'm starting a project called Glasshouse Judicial Transparency Project. And what I want to do is I want to get allowed in courtrooms video and audio recordings by average citizens, because this is our judicial system, and we should be able to see what's going on and not have it all hidden behind closed doors. And right now, almost every courtroom in the country, you have to get some sort of special permissions and jump through all sorts of hoops just to, if you wanted to turn on the record button on your iPhone. And I think it's wrong, and I think it shouldn't be allowed. And I think a lot of the problems there are with the judicial system, when you shed a little bit of light on them, then that's the first step towards fixing the problems that are there. Another project, again, that's just sort of in its infancy stages, is looking at the effects of adrenaline and the law. And that is that fight or flight reflex that we all have to perceive threats plays out in courtrooms all the time, and the results are that that disputes become more contentious, more lengthy, and there's a lot of ugliness that goes on that's part of not understanding and properly mitigating that fight or flight response in people. So that's another project I'm working on, and there will be more over time. But I'm hoping that the net effect of all this will be increased discussion and change for the positive within the legal profession.
Melody, when you say you're working on these different projects through your Legal Greenhouse and Glasshouse, are you doing this all by yourself, or do you have a team? How do you do it?
Most of it right now is myself, but I am looking for a team, and that's on my to-do list that I'm working on in the next few months. I do have had some help with the book, having that out, and then also have some other attorneys that I keep in the loop on things and kind of act as informal advisors on things. But there is room for creating a team, and I want to have that for each of these projects. But we're still in the development stages and I don't have them. But if any of the listeners are interested in any of these, I'd be more than happy to talk with them about how they can become involved, or if they have some project along these lines that they would like my help and support with. I'd love to talk with you.
Now, you mentioned in the book that there are loads and loads of law students. There's a glut of lawyers and a dearth of jobs. And so it's occurring to me that there might be people who can't find employment or, in a firm, or ways to start their own practice on a shoestring. There are lots of people who can't do that. They have their loans and they need the other experience, the initial starting experience. Why don't they come to you and become part of this movement rather than the, strict practice of law? Why don't they instead devote themselves to correcting the practice of law, right?
Well, that would be awesome. And the big reason why they don't is, at least as to Legal Greenhouse, I don't have the ability to pay them a salary at this point in time. Working on that. But law students come out of law school these days with tremendous debt. And I know from my reading and talking with more recent graduates, they usually come out of law school with somewhere between $100,000, $150,000 in debt for law school. And that is huge. I mean, that is just overwhelming. And I will tell you, when you have that kind of debt and you're coming fresh out of school, you're going to take whatever job you can get. You have to. Unless you're independently wealthy, you've got to pay your bills. You've got to keep a roof over your head and buy groceries and pay those massive student loan repayments. And it goes back to this fight or flight thing. You're back in survival mode. And so while you may love the idea of going out and changing the world, you've got to take care of making sure that your basic needs are met first. And so it's just harder to do that. But hopefully we'll be able to get some grant funding, different things, so we can start bringing in some of those attorneys that really want to foster change, that really want to change how they practice law and how they interact with the world. And that can be another tipping point in this whole process.
There is a lot of money in law. I mean, I'm aware of that. These corporate firms, we're going to possibly get into that discussion a little bit in this podcast, the fee structure and the, exorbitant fees that are being charged today. So there's money in law. Certain people are making a lot of money. And you would think that they might wake up one morning and blink and say, wow, I've got money. I could do something with it. I don't like the way my profession, has acted in this world, and let me fund Legal Greenhouse and Glasshouse. I'm hoping that something like that happens, because it's not like the profession itself has no money, but perhaps, as you're maybe suggesting, the profession isn't very self-correcting either. It takes a unique person like you to see that it needs to be corrected.
That's true. I mean, again, yes, there is a lot of money in the profession. There absolutely is. But there are not incentives for change. And this comes in even small, sort of neutral sort of thing. I remember when I graduated from law school, and the first law firm where I worked, they had just purchased a fax machine for, communications back and forth, law offices and such. And that was probably easily 10 years after faxing had become commonplace for other businesses and other people across other industries. So the legal world is always behind. And the thing is, for a lawyer, if you're billing hourly, what is the incentive to have more efficient systems in place? So, let's say you have, you need to draft a petition to file in the court. And you can sit down at your typewriter or your computer and it'll take you 6 hours to do, right? But so you can bill for 6 hours and there you go, whatever your rate is. But if you have the ability to go online and you've got some really good, solid template forms and you know what sort of paragraphs you need and whatever, and you can just cut and paste and throw that together, and maybe you can do it in 2-3 hours. You just gypped yourself out of half of the fee you could have charged. And if you are a young associate who's more likely to be innovative and time-saving, not to be ageist here, but by and large, the younger are more apt to look for a short solution. They have minimum hour billing requirements. Big law firms all have them. And you're supposed to bill 50 hours that week. Why would you work fast and clean off all your desk and it took you 25 hours to do it? How are you going to explain this to your bosses? Well, I was very efficient and I got good, solid quality work done for my client half the time of how much you wanted me to bill. What do I do now? They're not going to like that. So when you have incentives for slowness, incentives for inefficiency, you've got to change that incentive structure around or nothing will change.
Yeah, I remember while I was reading your book that's all too clear, that as you get better at something and more experienced, you still have to bill the standard time it would take if you didn't know how to do it, because you are then undercutting yourself. And so, I think that exists in every profession. So I guess in some ways you can't blame people for doing that. There should be a certain fee for a certain type of motion. And this brings me to the subject of the cap versus the floor in the way that the profession has, structured itself, and that this changed apparently in 50 or 60 years ago, that attorney fees used to have a cap on them, meaning they could go no higher for a certain task. And now there's a floor.
Yeah, it really was fascinating to me when I actually, dug in and did the research again, because I knew there had been a change that people talked about and wrote about hourly billing and how that had changed. And really most commentators write about how that just really acted to destroy the profession in a whole new way. But I went back and looked at what the American Bar Association and then a lot of other bar associations kind of falling under that used to do in terms of legal fees. And that is, they used to have fee schedules, minimum fee schedules that they published. And so they told lawyers that here's what you should charge for writing a will. Here's what you should charge for this. And in fact, and it's in the book, there's a quote from a 1961 ABA opinion that talks about how important these are. And it says it's no lawyer should be put in the position of bidding competitively for clients. It is proper for the profession to combat such evils by suggested or recommended minimum fee schedules and other practices which have a tendency to discourage the rendering of services for inadequate compensation. Direct or indirect advertising by whatever means that a lawyer habitually charges less than reasonable or minimum fees would, of course, be objectionable. And so their position was, you need to charge higher fees because it's unethical to not. And so you think about the client reading that, which the client wouldn't have read that, but if the client had read that, say, especially in our climate now, and say, okay, lawyers are saying you can't charge something that is reasonable and a competitive price, that's somehow unethical. It's just beyond screwed up. we in the rest of our market economy, we encourage competitive pricing. That is how it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to be able to do it better and cheaper, and that has an overall benefit for the consumers as a whole. And the legal system had turned that on end and said, no, it's unethical to charge something that's competitive priced or that you charge less than your fellow attorneys.
No, I understand. That's done in the medical profession also, the incredible charging. If you ask a nurse to bring you something in a hospital, they'll charge you an arm and a leg for it.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Like $50 for Tylenol or something.
Right. So there you go. But there are parallels between these different professions. I would say that it probably exists in accounting as well. But law, accounting, medicine, these professions that are, super white collar, where the most successful will end up with a giant Mercedes-Benz and a huge, huge house and possibly even a plane or a boat or some such thing. But so there's a difference, I think, in the nature of law. There are the shingle lawyers who have their little single or double room office, and they are in the outskirts to downtown, and they specialize in things like personal injury and drunk driving and traffic. And then you get the corporate law, which has big biotech firms as its clients, and they operate in the high rises and the top floor suites, and they have all the fancy equipment and staff, and they have their, I've seen some of this. They have their particular partners who first one will sell clients, and there'll be a specialist for trial, and they have all their subdivisions. And I even see now that in these top, huge law firms, many of which are international, you've got to have a degree in science if you're going to work in law, in a special kind of law. You have to be an engineer as well, or, a chemist, or you have to have double a higher education credentials.
Well, I would say, in terms of like additional degrees, certainly if you're talking about patent law, those attorneys do need to have a degree in the sciences or whatever in order to be competitive. Yeah. But honestly, the mega law firm concept has only been in place for the last couple of decades. And truthfully, there's no real benefit to clients by hiring a mega law firm versus even like a medium-sized law firm, because it's just a matter of by the bigger law firms, then they can report higher profits per partner or higher revenues in order to meet the standards of this just solely created out of thin air ranking system. And that's the AmLaw 100 and AmLaw 200.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the ranking system, because I found that very interesting, your own experience with it and your periscope into it.
Yeah. So Sophia was talking about kind of, shingle lawyers, as she said it, just sort of smaller lawyers, law firms that specialize in certain things. Truth is that overall of lawyers, there's only, I believe it's right around 5% of lawyers are in these mega law firms, or what's referred to as big law. And that is sort of a different, entirely different arena and area than everybody else that's in law school. There's this hierarchical structure. In big law, it used to be, well, let me go back to the hierarchical structure. I believe it's U.S. News and World Report, and forgive me if I'm confusing the two things. U.S. News and World Report ranks law schools, but I think it's American Lawyer that does the AmLaw lists. Every year, American Lawyer, which is a commercial magazine, creates a ranking list of law firms and what they call the, like best law firms in the country. And the criteria they use have things to do with like annual revenue, profits per partner, how many lawyers there are in the law firm. These sort of criteria. It's nothing to do with how well they did for their clients. There's nothing to do with that. So the law firm sort of jockeying position every year to be higher up on this list of AmLaw 100, because if they're higher up on this list, then they can go to their clients, which, as you pointed out, a lot of times are mega corporations with lots of money to spend on legal services, and say, we are on the AmLaw 100 list. We're number 10 this year. We were number 12 last year, and now we're up to number 10. And my, aren't we cool and wonderful? And that's why we charge $700, $800, $900 an hour for our services. So the clients buy into that, or they used to buy into it a lot more than they do now. They buy into that prestige, going, oh, wow, they're really important and they're a heavyweight law firm, and so we need to hire them because we're in some legal trouble or we need some legal assistance. The problem is that then the law firms turn into these contortionists of trying to adapt their finances to get the numbers they wanted to get on the list that they wanted. And my favorite story was about this one law firm, over 100-year-old law firm that closed several years back. It just finally imploded on itself because, in one part, their colorful accounting techniques. So here's what they did. Every year, they would sit down amongst themselves, the partners, and decide, who got how they would split up profits for the year. Well, instead of, and then those numbers would go into the reported profits per partner as part of the AmLaw list, right? But instead of looking at their actual books and the actual revenue they brought in and then divvying up something of a real number, what they would do was they would decide how much they should get in profits per partner, and then they would go borrow the money in order to pay that to their partners. So it's a complete sham, a complete fiction. And it just brought out for me the fact that this is all this crazy game being played that has nothing to do with optimizing service for clients. And I will tell you that in the past, probably like 8-9 years, there has been a dramatic shift in that these big companies, savvy companies with lots of money to spend on legal, have started to back away from big law and say, no, we're not paying your ridiculous prices anymore. We don't care about your AmLaw status. We're going to a mid-sized law firm that still has high quality attorneys and whatever, and they're only charging half the price. Or they're outsourcing work to India, to all different places. They're slowly dismantling that big law mystique. And the big law has been laying off associates and trying to change things. And in fact, a lot of them have stopped reporting their profits per partner and other revenue numbers that get factored into the AmLaw 100. So I'm starting to see a little bit of a shift, but it took the clients that had big bucks to spend on legal to say, we're not going that direction anymore. The sky is not the limit for you guys anymore. We're going to focus on quality instead.
How do they outsource to India? I mean, what kind of work? Because you'd think that whoever's doing the work of a lawyer should have been schooled in America, gone to American law school. Isn't that right?
You would think, and you would think with as many unemployed lawyers as there are plenty of people here to use. However, they can access, there are a lot of law firms and groups in India is a primary place, but there are other countries too. And sometimes it's people that were trained in American law schools, but they are in India. They aren't U.S. licensed, and they are doing things from legal research, due diligence, document review, to litigation strategy and motion practice. It's really a lot that is done, and I don't know if clients always realize to what extent things are being done overseas, outsourced. The other outsourcing that happens is with the term that's used is contract attorneys. And these are people who work for temporary legal placement agencies. And they get paid to do, like, document review is a big one. And so how this works is these, young lawyers don't have a job. They get on the list for these employment agencies. And then they get called in for projects like document review, and maybe it's for a couple weeks, maybe it's for a couple months. They usually get paid somewhere, I'm reading now, they tend to get paid somewhere in the neighborhood of 25, 30, maybe $50 an hour. But even that's a bit of a stretch. Now, that may sound like a lot of money to, average person flipping burgers or something. But when you are paying off $100,000, $150,000 in legal fees, that is not that much money. And especially when it's not regular work, you don't get health insurance benefits, anything like that. And what makes matters even worse is for these contract attorneys, it's not like doing this is some sort of way to be networking and getting the people that are doing the hiring to be able to know you and get to know your work and maybe an opportunity for advancement. They're often reviewing these documents in basements in bad conditions, just really hideous sort of way to treat people who are working for you. And then they bill this out to the clients at $300-$400 an hour. So it's huge profit centers. And for me, it's just sort of this, I envision this like back in the old days where they'd have, galley of slaves rowing the boats, and then the other people, are up on the top of the boat, don't see what all is going on underneath. That's what is happening. And there's so many lawyers who are coming out of law school and becoming so horribly disillusioned because they've gotten stuck in that track of contract attorney, which is the death of their legal career before it's even started.
Yeah, I've actually seen some of that, Melody. Now that you're painting the picture, I'm getting the memory coming back. But I don't think the contract attorneys I saw, they were always slumped. They had like this very fatigued look, and they were pale and stressed out, and they were always working in some, other area that wasn't really used, like a back room or something, which was not well ventilated, and they just had mountains of work to do, and it looked very boring, and they were very bored and very, very unhappy. And I can see why that doesn't help you in your career, other than providing this modicum of money that you can at least try to pay a few bills with, like your food or... But it's sad, isn't it?
It's demoralizing. It is demoralizing because, here you spent all this time and all these years and all this money trying to elevate yourself into a respectful career for making a decent amount of money. And it's not even that you necessarily want to make sure you get huge amounts of money, just be able to make a decent living. And you've put in all the time and effort. You've done what you thought you should do in order to do that. And all of a sudden, you're stuck reviewing documents in a basement.
Yeah.
Where do you go? And in fact, there are plenty of people that do the hiring that have been quoted as saying, if we see on someone's resume that they have worked as a contract attorney, we won't even consider them for employment as a job. It's like, okay, so let's see, if you were a trust fund baby and if you didn't have a job, you could just sit home and watch TV, that would look better on a resume than if you went out and worked as a contract attorney. It just doesn't make any sense. And again, none of this and this snobbery and this hierarchical system, there's no benefit to the clients here. There's some contract attorneys that are just skill level, intellect, amazing. And yet the clients who are getting the benefit of the work that they do under somebody else's name will never know that.
Yeah, I can see that, and it is very demoralizing, as you say. And I guess your book also is about not just why lawyers suck or why lawyers have come to be known as sucky, bad, rip-off artists. There are words printed on the cover, by the way. I'm looking at it now. The cover design includes the words arrogant, greedy, egotistical, condescending, incompetent, contentious, and dishonest. And all of those are adjectives that are easily applied to many of these lawyers who have given the profession a bad reputation. Melody, I want to actually remind listeners that this book isn't just an expose. It is peppered with these helpful ways for you to surmount a certain kind of problem Melody is describing. And she calls that the helpful hack. And those are in every chapter, at least one. And they are, like tips, I guess you could call them, on what to do if you find yourself in this position, or to expect that this is going to be part of the way you will be treated if you retain a lawyer or a law firm. Melody, tell us why you chose the subtitle, Hacking the Legal System. And this is only part one. She has a series of books planned. This is the first in the series.
Oh, yeah. I've already started writing the next two, but because there's so many things and angles to go at with this. But I use the term hacking in the term of life hacks. And I don't know if you've heard of this term before, but there's a TV show that my daughter and I watched recently about life hacks. And it's all these creative solutions to different problems you may encounter over time as you navigate life. And I know one of them had to do with like how to get the best rate on a hotel room when you're traveling, or how to find out if someone has stolen your identity, or different things like that. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for here. Is it's one thing to explain why lawyers suck, but that's kind of not complete unless you actually have some helpful creative solutions for dealing with at least some of those things. So that's why I added in the helpful hacks. And some of them are really pretty simple. One of them that I talk about, this is in my chapter about real lawyers don't work 80 hours a week, but I give questions that you can ask your law firm when you hire a law firm that can help you see whether you're going to be getting attorneys that are sleep deprived and burnt out, or ones that have some work-life balance and are able to think more proactively and creatively about solving your legal problems. And so, does the law firm expect that their lawyers are there 6-7 days a week? That's not a good sign for you as a client. The law firm may think, oh, well, that demonstrates our commitment to the client. Well, frankly, a better commitment to the client is that you go home every night and you spend a little time with your family and you get a good night's sleep. It's a lot more useful for clients when you're like that way, because then you come in the next morning and you're rested and your brain is able to function in a way that is optimal for the client. So these are the type of things that are in the helpful hacks that are throughout the book.
Yeah, I think what happens is that clients too often defer to the dictates of the law firm because they consider them to be the experts, and they never even bat an eye at the fee structure or the ways that certain projects are handled, and they just find themselves extremely unhappy at the end of, a month or 2 or 3, and when there's been very little progress and huge bills that have arrived. And so the book is very insightful in this regard, I found anyway, and I think it's something that lots and lots of people should buy. And I want to explain that this is not a hard book to read. It's a thin book, it's light, you can travel with it, you can take it to the beach, you can buy the ebook too, I think. Isn't there an ebook? And tell us about where you get this book.
It is on Amazon, and so you can order it from there. It's also available in the Kindle version. If you go to Legal Greenhouse, you can also purchase it there. legalgreenhouse.com, and right there on the face page there's a link, and you can buy it there.
Yeah, Melody, I think it's a great concept. I think you're on to something here. And tell us what the following two titles will be, please.
Uh, okay, so the ones that I'm working on that should be coming out in the next year or two are Courtroom Drama, and that one will delve into what goes into a jury trial and really all the drama and craziness that goes around um, cases between having a dispute and it actually getting to a jury trial. And so it's sort of geared towards prospective jurors. The other one is Managing Mercenaries, and this will be an essential guide for business attorneys, especially general counsel, in-house counsel, who have to deal with outside litigation counsel. Usually they don't understand how the litigation process works. They don't understand the things that their lawyers are doing cost them so much more money than is necessary, so much more time. And I want to be able to give them the information that they need in order to keep their litigation costs down and reasonable, and understand what these attorneys are spending all this money on, what they're really doing.
So that book is for the profession or it's for the public?
It's for the public. It's directed. Managing Mercenaries is directed towards business, in-house business legal counsel. And then the other one is directed towards the general public, Courthouse Drama. And that one, I'm really excited about constructing that, because I realized in explaining jury trials to other people and the whole process of litigation that gets to that, it's like a movie production that goes on usually at least a year, sometimes longer than that, where it's filled with a series of casting calls and script writing, and it is just like producing a movie, putting on a jury trial. And so I think it will help give some insight on how the jury system works, what to do when you are in the process of it. I mean, I don't want this movie, or I really want to have a jury trial. Here's how I get one. But the bottom line is renewing back to the people the fact that as a jury member, you are the final line and check of making sure that the Constitution and the governmental entities are all operating in a proper way. And the concept of jury nullification, which the court will not instruct you on if you're a juror. They will not tell you about jury nullification, but you as a jury have the right to decide when you go back to that jury room that I don't agree with this law or how it is being enforced in this case, and therefore I am not going to agree to a guilty verdict because of that. And the general public largely does not know that fact, but juries are the final check and balance on a judicial system and a prosecutorial law enforcement system that sometimes gets out of control. You should be excited. Yes, and I've seen that.
Yeah, I know Melody actually from the Dortch case. That's how I heard of her and then eventually met her. David Dortch, Dr. Dortch, the optometrist in Riverside County. And I think, Melody, you saw some really, really over-the-top, indescribable corruption in that case.
Absolutely. It just astounded me. I had never seen anything like it. And I realized how the system of checks and balances has not been really in place, especially in that county, because there is so much overreaching and money on the side of prosecution of crimes that it's actually skewing and, in my mind, creating the vision of a big crime problem that is far above and beyond an actual crime problem in that county. Now, I know a lot of people would dispute that, but I've got to tell you again, when you follow the money and you see the millions of dollars that are flowing into that county from U.S. Department of Justice is one big source, but there are others also. and saying, here's a bunch of money, now go out and fight drug crimes, and then report to us quarterly, the end of the year, whatever, how you spent the money. It creates an incentive to push the boundaries and to accuse people and arrest people and convict people for the financial benefit. And we have already pieces of this coming out now in the media. As to the Dortch case, I tried to get attention to the media and no one seemed to want to report this. It's like they were afraid they'd lose their law enforcement sources for stories. I don't know. But a report did come out in the USA Today and one of the other local newspapers up there within the past few months, where they had discovered that the DEA was involved in working with the local prosecutor in this massive, unheard of, broad scope of wiretapping within Riverside County. And it was a program that even the Department of Justice considered to be illegal. Excuse me. And the outgoing DA, there was a new one that took office, I believe, in January. The outgoing DA is on record in these reports saying, yes, I worked with the DEA on this because I needed help with the funding for my office. So admitting that there was a financial reason for him participating in this wiretapping program that was just above and beyond what is legally permissible or proper. So, I think it's really important. Again, this goes into the whole idea of judicial transparency. The general public needs to understand what is going on out there and what needs to be changed. And, maybe the first step in all that is the next time you get your jury summons, go happily, try to get on the jury. See what's going on, see what cases are being prosecuted, see how things are handled, and go sit and watch courts. Courtrooms are open and public with very few exceptions. Go in there and see what's going on. See if the public representatives that you have elected into office, see if they're doing the job the way you think it should be done. You cannot keep a blind eye to the things that are going on because, next it's going to be you who's wiretapped or has an unreasonable search of their house. You've got to start where you can now, even before it personally affects you.
Yeah, that's good advice to get out there. And, we've done some shows. I've done some shows with others about these militarization grants, and a lot of these programs are funded. You mentioned the word funding coming from certain government sources. And it's all to do with the expansion of the police state and the you could say even the fabrication of crime that doesn't exist in order to militarize and get heavily, equipped to become more of a police state, to be more, as the public, we will be surveilled more strictly, and there will be all kinds of restraints and restrictions placed on us as to our rights and behavior. So it's a very complicated and distorted world that is being shaped around us as we try to navigate it with, our own sense of what's fair and right. And I'm happy to have met you and to have read this book, and I look forward to reading the other books also, because I think they're very, very enlightening. And I have to say, as I was reading this book, when I finished it, I had this sense of depth, like someone had handed me some kind of, thing to look through, and I was now able to see into this deep water that had been very murky and very distasteful to me before getting the copy of the book that you so kindly sent me. It's amazing, and I think everyone really should get a better understanding of this particular profession, because it does control our lives, and this whole legal system is, it's like a big mess of tangled, thorny vines all around us. It has its codes, as I've discussed in other shows, its Uniform Commercial Code, 600,000 of them, and we could violate any one of those codes at any time without even realizing it. And then when we have violated without our own knowledge, we become ensnared in this thing called the legal system, and we might have to get a lawyer or be appointed a lawyer. So Melody, who's done all these different kinds of law and has a heart left in her, thank God, except for, tell us about It Depends. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It depends. I'm not sure. I would like to think that I have a shred of that heart left, and I, sort of maybe have stopped this process. I've actually stopped doing litigation now, as of the past few months, because I can't take the stress of it anymore. I've been doing this over 20 years, but it is frustrating because I have to run a business, and when people are unhappy with me, I take that to heart. And yet I have to understand that people are going to love me or hate me depending on their circumstances and how the case has screwed them over that they're involved in. And I know there was one situation many years back where I had to leave doing a case before I had completed it, for some various reasons, and I got a very angry letter from my client, and I felt really, really bad about that for a lot of years until I happened to be in touch with one of this person's subsequent lawyers, probably about 15 years after this initial letter that I had, and I was talking to them about the situation and how I'd left things when I had left representing this client. And I shared with them the regret, and I said, I don't think this client was very happy with me at the end. And they said, no, really, he had the best things to say about you every time that I talked with him. And we talked about the work that you had done and so forth. And I realized I need to understand the bigger picture here, that unfortunately sometimes I am a bit of a pawn in this game, this judicial system game that is bigger than myself. And despite my best efforts, I can't make everybody happy. And I just need to live with that as being just part of the profession that I'm in. And the best thing I can do is to try to make the profession better, or at least this first step of trying to make the process less confusing for people as they go through it.
Yeah, that's very noble of you. And to me, it says you're a real human being with a real heart. And you've obviously put a lot of effort into thinking these things through and then collating them into the structure of a book. And I have to tell people, books have to be organized. They have a particular architecture to them. They have to keep the reader going. They have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have to grow in their thesis, and then they have to be full of themes that, are pertinent and make them interesting to read. But It Depends, Melody, it was an example you had, I think, about how lawyers cannot do simple. It was probably in that chapter.
That's true. And I will tell you, talk about the structure of the book. And I actually, as I was early in this process, I was working with a publishing consultant, and she was helping me get through this process of, the early stages of the book. And I'm telling you, every week when we talked, I had a different structure for the outline of the book. Because you don't know, as a lawyer and doing writing, you don't know when to stop. You don't know when to back up and say, what's the big picture here? And in terms of the outline of this book and how it eventually ended up being structured, was the subsequent writing coach that I had met. And she said, this is not a legal brief. This is a story. And you need to approach it in that way. And within 2 weeks, I had the manuscript done and out to people for an initial round of commenting and edits. It is a story. It's my story and the story of clients that I have had and other attorneys. But it's a story with explanations of how life is and how interactions are between lawyers and clients, and in a small way, how they can be better and how clients can take control back by just having some additional knowledge.
Melody, has it occurred to you to market this book to law firms? Not huge ones, but some of the smaller ones, because as you were talking, I mean, there was a quality in your voice just now that was really, it was very, how do I say this? It had like perspective in it, and it had human pathos in it. And I'm not trying to over decorate it, but I heard that and I thought, I can think of law firms who should buy this book, buy the case, and distribute it among their staff, their lawyers particularly. It would be very helpful.
I guess I hadn't really thought of that. I know my intended market was not lawyers, though I hope that lawyers would read it also. The feedback that I have gotten from lawyers, with very few exceptions, has been very positive and very, oh yeah, me too. I think that's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. I should look into that.
Yeah, I was working for an environmental law firm, and I had read a book, Against the Tide by Cornelia Dean. She was a science writer for the New York Times, and as it so happened, a friend of mine was the editor of Columbia University Press, and they were the ones who put this book out. And I just saw it in a bookstore, and I picked it up, and it was on the table of new books. I read the first page or two, and I went, wow, I'm getting this book. And it was about shoreline erosion, which is a relatively new science, mainly spearheaded by, I think his name is Doug Inman at Scripps Institution of Oceanography right here in San Diego. And before, I guess, in the earlier part of the last century, the beach was pretty much left alone. People didn't build on the beach. They were smarter than that because they knew that storms could take the beach apart and destroy anything that was built there. But in modern times, with great wealth and also the solidification of the alluvial nature of the shore by putting concrete and whatnot, you can, in fact, build. The marshes in New Jersey have been filled in and built on and so forth. So there are still all these issues having to do with erosion, many, many different factors playing on one strip of beach. And this has all been studied now. But the book, I lent it to the head, the chief guy, the big honcho in this particular law firm. And he thought it was fantastic. And he bought a case and sent it to all the city councils all up and down the San Diego coastline and had them all read it in order that they could understand where they stood in all the different litigation issues that arose around building on the shoreline. The Coastal Commission, everybody got this book. And I was very happy that I had done such a thing, I had contributed. That was like shake and bake, and I helped.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to give that some thought. I think you may be onto something.
So anyway, I'm very happy to have had this interview, and I hope people found it interesting and will reach out and get this book. I'm going to link to Amazon and Legal Greenhouse in the show description. And again, Melody, is it your website then would be Legal Greenhouse particularly? Or if people want to get hold of you, I think you said you're not doing litigation so much, but you are doing contract law and you're building, your business out into other areas.
Yes, they can contact me through the legalgreenhouse.com website, or melody@legalgreenhouse.com is the best way to reach me there.
Okay. Well, that's good. And again, the book will be on Amazon and at Legal Greenhouse also. And thank you so much for this wonderful show and for all your insights and all your feeling. I really appreciate it. So can't wait for you to do the next book. But don't hurry, because you have to do the right book, right?
That's right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking with you this morning.
Okay, well, bye for now, and we'll have you back.
Hello, this is Sophia introducing you to Himalayan soap berries. Did you know that ancient people did laundry too? There are many plants that have natural surfactants that draw out dirt, oils, and odors and can be used as detergent substitutes. Dried berries from the Sapindus mucorosi tree in the Himalayan foothills, placed in a little mesh bag in your washing machine, will clean your clothes as well as any commercial laundry soap, which you may never go back to again. The liquid extract from the berries can be diluted for household cleaning or used to wash your clothes also. The result is really cool, clothes that are soft and smell like they hung in the sun and wind to dry, no perfumes, chemicals, fillers, or dye. And the berries are totally natural, botanical, biodegradable, as well as cheap and fun and reusable. See avatarproducts.com, the Sun and Skin section, for Himalayan soap berries and liquid soap berry extract.